Okay, we're here. Today's the day. It is 1 year since my abortion. And I knew I had to make some sort of an anniversary video, and I really didn't know what to talk about. Not for lack of ideas, but for too many ideas. Too many things I want to say, too many things I want to talk about, and I don't know which one's the most important. I figured I'd talk about the experience, obviously, and about this idea that you don't really know what it's like until you get into that kind of a situation. And I hear that a lot from women who've had abortions. You don't know what it's like until you get into that kind of a situation. And when you hear it from a woman who's had an abortion, an elective abortion, it's very easy to look at that elective abortion and say, well, she's saying that because of all the reasons that she's given for her abortion. Oh, I was alone, I was scared, I was poor, I was single, I was, all these things. And it can appear very much to a pro-lifer as a list of excuses. And it's really hard to sympathize with a list of excuses, and it's very difficult to understand what she might actually be saying, this hypothetical woman who had an elective abortion. You really, really don't know what it's like until you get there. And I've been trying really hard. I've been reading lots and lots of stories by women who've had elective abortions. I've been trying very hard to understand what it's like, and I don't know. When you get up to the actual abortion procedure, I've never had one. I've never had one. I've never had an elective abortion. I've had an ectopic baby cut out of me. And when I say cut out of me, I mean it doesn't go through the birth canal. No, they rip your stomach open and they take it out that way. It's a little more dramatic that way. And of course, I've had a therapeutic abortion, which is just not the same kind of experience. So I thought I would try to share that with you, what it's like, because you don't know what it's going to be like until you get into that kind of a situation. And I was talking with my husband about it a couple days ago. What it's like when you find out that your baby is going to die and you're still pregnant. And we were talking about the sense of urgency that we had, because nobody really sat down with us and filled us in on, hey, you can get the cutoff, the legal cutoff where you live is 20 weeks. All the abortion clinics in your area only go up to, I think it was like 15 weeks. That's the latest that anyone in the state was willing to go to. But you, because you have a medically non-viable pregnancy, you can go all the way up to 24 weeks, and we'll arrange everything for you. Nobody sat down and told us that. They were like, well, if you're looking for an abortion, I mean, I've got some names that might help you, but, And so when I first called the offices of the doctor who ultimately ended up giving me my abortion, I told them I need an abortion, and they said, we don't do that here. And I've mentioned it in other videos. I was like, well, my son is dying and I need someone to help me. So if you can't, I would very much appreciate it if you gave me the number of someone who will. And at that point, they put me on hold. And I guess they talked for a little while in their office, and then they got back to me. But they hadn't heard about me yet, because I hadn't been sent over as a reference to their office yet, because the doctor who ultimately did the diagnostic work, he hadn't sent me over as a reference until he had the diagnostic work in paper, like in his hand. Like, he had to make absolutely certain this was rock solid, because it was a hospital. And they weren't going to let anybody slip through the cracks until you, like, yay, I get an abortion way later than I'm supposed to, without, at this hospital that's, reputable and respectable and all that, without having a very, very clearly, very, very well documented non-viable pregnancy. Like, that was the magic key that unlocked the magic door. The pregnancy has to be non-viable, and ours was non-viable. But there was another couple who had a pregnancy that was really bad, but it wasn't non-viable, and they had to go out of state, and we heard that story. And so there we were. I believe we were 15 and a half weeks at that point, but maybe we gotten into 16 weeks. I can't remember. I think we were 16 weeks at about the time we went in for our Planned Parenthood visit. Anyway, 15 and a half weeks, 16 weeks, that 20-week drop-off mark is coming up really fast. And that's the first we've known about it. Like, okay, something's not right with the pregnancy. Okay, it's a terminally ill baby. Congratulations. And that was all we knew. Like, nobody was sitting down with us and telling us, don't worry, you have options. Don't worry, you have time to breathe. It was, okay, that's it. You know, you have 5 weeks to figure out how to get an abortion. I mean, the question is, a question for a lot of people is, do you want an abortion? And that's an interesting question. It's an important question. And when I first started making these videos, was very, very careful. So a year ago, if you look at my old videos, I was very careful to try and be as open as possible about, well, you can try to keep your baby alive as long as possible. You can opt for, prenatal hospice. You can opt for, infant hospice. They have these programs available. There are all sorts of things you can do to give your baby the best kind of care that you can think of. And I was so busy trying to make it look like, well, you can try to keep your baby alive, and, well, you can do this to keep your baby alive, and you can do that to keep your baby alive. I think I gave people the impression that you can actually keep your baby alive. So let me try to clarify a little bit. You can try to keep your baby alive. And if that's what you believe, then by all means go for it. You can try to do all sorts of things for your baby. You can keep them alive for as long as medical science will allow you to, and we didn't do that. And you might be wondering, well, why didn't you do that? Don't you care about your baby? It's like, yeah, I care about my baby. I heard the diagnosis. I know how a trisomy 18 baby dies. They suffocate. Either that or they have heart failure, but, a lot of them suffocate to death. I've nearly suffocated to death. I know what it feels like. It's not fun. Dying is never fun, I think. I don't know what it's like to die of old age. Basically, it's not fun. The dying portion of the death process is not fun. Hospice in many ways is about trying to make it as not miserable as possible. And so there's infant hospice, but they still end up going through the whole dying process. And I looked at it and it's like, I don't want my baby to have to be born and then face death without having acquired any of the coping mechanisms that I had acquired at the time that I faced that same kind of death. I want him to have a peaceful death. And that's the thing, when you get a terminal diagnosis for your child, your unborn child, suddenly death is lurking around every corner. And it wakes up this very, very, I won't say primitive, but very instinctive part of you, this very instinctive maternal part of you, like, I have to protect the baby. I have to protect the baby, and whatever you lock onto is the best way to protect the baby from death, because death is everywhere. There's bad death, and then there's good death, and good death is whatever death seems more preferable or less horrible than all the other kinds of death. Whatever you lock onto and say, yep, that's the good death, that's what you're going to pursue, and you're going to pursue it very, very single-mindedly. And that's the part of the experience that I can't begin to properly relay to people. Like, that's the part where I honestly can say you don't know what it's like until you've been there, because all you care about, all you see, all you focus on is, how do I protect my child from the horrible thing that is coming for him? And for me, I wanted him to have a peaceful death. And I wanted him to be somewhere warm and comfortable and familiar and safe. And he was somewhere warm and comfortable and familiar and safe. And I wanted death to come to him there. Because it's not fun to be born and then just to die. And I didn't want to bring him into the world like that. And that was all I cared about. And it's going to be different for different people. And that's the thing I keep trying to explain to people. It's like it's different for different people. I've met moms who were like, I just fought to keep him alive every second of every day as much as I could. But even that mom, when I talked to her, and that was my aunt, I talked to her and she was like, yep, there comes a point where you can't keep them alive anymore. It's like, well, they can be brain dead and you can put them on a bunch of machines and technically they're alive. But they're really not. That's really not something we want to do. Fair enough. The lady I talked to who put her son on hospice care, I mean, that seemed like a really good way to go. I read one woman's account of her situation with a trisomy 18 baby, and she said, we got the diagnosis, and all I wanted to do was hold him. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to hold him. And now I have to take a cat break. It's the middle of the night, and this fellow was right outside the door. And I have the door closed because I don't want the lights waking everybody else in the house up. Oop, there you go. But, yeah, she got the diagnosis, and all she wanted to do was hold her baby. And I think that a lot of people who are pro-life look at that and say, well, that's what you're supposed to do. And what they don't understand is you don't know exactly what's going to seem like the most protective thing that you can do for your dying child until you have a dying child. And you might not necessarily do what you expected you were going to do. In my case, I think I was actually very lucky in the sense that I did exactly what I expected I was going to do, and my husband also did exactly what he expected he was going to do, and the two of us jointly had the same goals. We had the same goals for slightly different reasons, but basically we both really wanted to have the abortion. Not because we wanted to have an abortion. Both of us really hated that idea, but because an abortion in those circumstances seemed like the most humane thing we could do for our child. And I know that I in particular was in a very strange mood. I remember we went to Planned Parenthood and I was crying because my baby was dying. And I mean, we ended up getting kicked out, but I remember sitting after they separated me from my husband, and they wouldn't explain to us why they separated me from my husband. Like they forced us apart. They wouldn't let me go in unless, well, they wouldn't let him in at all, except when they took his money. So they let him in, he was able to pay with a credit card, and then they sent him back out again. But then they wouldn't let him in again until, after that. They tried to get me to go in, but they wouldn't let him in. And so they sent us back out to the lobby to wait some more. And then they called me again, and I had to go without him. So I went without him, but I was upset about it. And I remember the nurse and the dismissive tone of her voice. Miss Evans, back outside. I remember that. I'm never going to forget that. I'm never going to forget her face. As long as I live, I swear, I will never forget that woman's face. And I don't mean that in a creepy way. I mean that after I nearly bled out, that was the thing that haunted my nightmares. I'm never going to forget it. Anyway, they made me go back out. I had to calm down and, plaster on a big fake smile and head right back up and act all friendly and happy and cheerful. Like, I'm getting an abortion. Woohoo! This is going to be fun. Yeah. And then when I was separated from my husband, they put me in a little secondary lobby in the interior area. I was all alone. I cried some more because this was my idea of hell. And I remember thinking, like, this is hell. That's it. I'm in hell. This is what hell is like. And they then took me to a little teeny clinical room. There was the little like padded cushioned lounging chair with the little stirrups and all that. And I think that they used that for like STD testing, like just general gynecological sorts of affairs. It was very small, it was very cramped. They took me back there and they told me the doctor would be with me in a minute. And I remember sitting there, and by that point, I don't know if you've ever been so stressed out, like really stressed out, where everything's starting to get a little bit removed and you're starting to feel a little bit like you're floating, just kind of floating. And you've distanced yourself enough from your surroundings that you just feel completely numb. And I was sitting there and I was pretty distant and I was pretty numb. And the only thing that I could think again and again and again is, I don't want my son to die here. This is horrible. This isn't a good place to die. I don't want my son to die here. I don't want my son to die here. Just again and again and again, I don't want my son to die here, because they wouldn't let me ask questions. They wouldn't let me question their authority in any way, shape, or form. I didn't feel safe or comfortable asking them any general questions. They weren't really talkative. They just kind of shooed me around from place to place, like, over here. Okay, ma'am, go over here. Okay, go over here. Like I was a piece of livestock, an animal. Like, it was. I suppose when people talk about a dehumanizing situation, that was a dehumanizing situation, and all I cared about was my son. All I cared about was his well-being. And I looked at it and was like, I don't want him to die somewhere where his father is made to sit out in the lobby like some sort of second-class citizen. And he can't even be there for the consultation. I don't want this. I don't want any of this. I don't like the way they treat me. If they treat me this way, how are they going to treat my son? If they treat my husband so dismissively, how are they going to treat my son? None of this is okay. And then the CFO of all people showed up and told me that because I created a disturbance in the lobby or something like that, they weren't able to give me care at this time. And I remember that she had to tell me a couple times, because I was just staring at her, and I swear I was staring right through her too. I was just so numb and so cold and so... I was out of it. I was a little bit out of it. I was really stressed out, you guys. And she told me the second time, and then she asked me if I had heard her, and I had this moment of just slow dawning realization, like, I can leave this place, and my son's not going to die here, and I never have to come back here, and I never have to deal with any of you ever again, and I can leave. I can just get the hell out of here, because this isn't a good place to die, and my son isn't going to die in this place. And I remember just looking up at her and very calmly, I can't remember the exact words I said. It was like something like, I don't think I'm going to be needing your services today either, or wanting your services today either. I said something extremely polite and extremely professional, and I can't actually remember what the hell I said. And then I got up and I marched out of there, and she kind of followed behind me, and I got to the exit, and my husband was there, and he looked extremely confused, and they were giving him his money back, because we'd paid for the appointment already. They were giving him his money back. And they hadn't told him why they were giving him his money back. They hadn't told him anything. They just called him, Mr. Evans, please come over here, and taken his credit card, and they returned all his money. And he saw me, and he just looked at me like, what's going on? And it was because they didn't tell him a damn thing, because they didn't respect him enough to let him know. And I laughed most of the drive home, which was a 3-hour drive, because we'd driven 3 hours just to find a clinic that would give us an abortion. And I laughed because I have never been kicked out of a place before. And I don't think I'm really ever going to get kicked out of a place again. Like, I'm not the kind of person who gets kicked out of places. I'm not the kind of person who demands to see the manager, which we did while we were there, because nobody would explain to us why my husband couldn't stay with me for the consultation for our son's death. Nobody cared about the fact that it was his son too. Nobody cared that this was a wanted pregnancy and we had a terminal diagnosis and we didn't have any other options. Nobody cared. They just kept giving us the same answer. Well, that's just our policy. Now obey. And I remember just having a lot of emotions about that. For many, many days afterwards, more than just days, months. I remember there was a long period of time where I couldn't think about that incident without just getting shaky all over, because it was so upsetting. And of course, after I had the bleed out, I kept looking at it, and it's like, if I had gone along with them, if I had just obeyed and just shut up, would they have been able to stop the bleeding in time? Would Would I have felt safe enough with those people to ask them, hey, I think I'm bleeding a lot. Maybe I need to change my pad? Would I have, I mean, so many things, so many things. They run through your head a lot, you know? And I just remember, like, that was the thing that was so scary that I couldn't think about it for a while because it was just too damn upsetting because they wouldn't have told my husband that anything bad had happened to me until there was nothing they could do to hide it. And then they probably wouldn't have told him very much. They would have told him the bare minimum, if that. Like, oh yeah, your wife is being transferred to the hospital, so now you can leave. I wouldn't be surprised. And it would be perfectly in keeping with the pattern they had established with us from all the other interactions that we had with them during that visit. They had a very clear pattern. They talked to me, not much, bare minimum. They didn't talk to him unless it was absolutely vitally necessary. And it was upsetting. Because if they don't treat me like I'm a very human person, and they definitely don't treat him like a human person, what are they going to do to my son? It was a very upsetting experience. And I went online and I talked about it. And of course, I've mentioned that before in other videos, how that was treated. I don't really know how to explain to people what any of that really felt like. I don't know how to put it into words clearly enough to really convey it. I know so many pro-choice people who look at it and say, well, it's just a clump of cells and an abortion shouldn't be any more of an involved procedure than getting a tooth pulled. When you're 17 weeks pregnant, it's not like getting a tooth pulled. It is a multi-day procedure. It is painful. They had to put laminaria in me in order to widen the cervix so that they could remove my son. It didn't hurt him at all. And they gave me painkillers for it, which was very nice of them. And they also had some anti-anxiety meds that they prescribed to me, which I didn't take because I wasn't afraid. I was just upset. And I cared about what happened to my son. And I didn't feel anxiety. I was just upset. And that laminaria does not feel good. And, you know, when you're just a little bit pregnant, they give you like a stick of laminaria. When you're as pregnant as I was, they gave you a whole lot more than just one stick. And it hurts. It really hurts. I mean, it's cervical pain, and I hate cervical pain. So, you know, when your cervix is dilating and it really hurts, yeah, it feels like that. Only you don't get a baby at the end of it. You know, we did all that. They sent me home. I slept as much as I could that night. And then we did the procedure. It's not exactly like getting a tooth pulled. And, you know, afterwards I did nearly bleed out. Because the farther along you are in a pregnancy, the more dangerous an abortion becomes. So that whole, oh, it couldn't have possibly happened because it only happens to like 0.1% of abortions. Well, that number gets a little bit higher the more pregnant you are. And so I think I was like 1 in 500. I think that was my chances. I got lucky. I got really super lucky by having a 1 in 3,000 pregnancy, which was my trisomy 18 pregnancy. And then I got lucky again by having a 1 in 500 chance of bleeding out post-op. So yeah, I'm just a lucky gal. And up until after the procedure, I didn't have the time to feel anything other than that single driving focus. I have to protect him from the bad death. I have to make sure that doesn't happen to him. I have to make sure that he has a good death. I only have 5 weeks, and I have to make sure that he has a good death. What's a good death? Well, an abortion. For me, it was an abortion. For other parents, it's going to be something else. It's going to change from individual to individual. I can say that till I'm blue in the face. People aren't going to understand it. That's okay. You don't have to understand it. Every individual has a different internal conception of what the good death is. And when it's your unborn baby that is headed straight for death, you're going to really fixate on that concept, because death is all around and death is coming at you from every angle. You have to find a good one, and you're going to go for that one as hard as you can. And for us, abortion was the good death. So 5 weeks, let's rush. Gotta keep it together. Can't be feeling emotion. Can't be feeling sad. Can't be mourning what happened. Can't be crying. Gotta move. Gotta make it work. Gotta put yourself in vulnerable and compromising situations to make it work, such as going to Planned Parenthood. My husband took the day off work at a moment's notice because Planned Parenthood decided they were gonna cancel our appointment and then reschedule us at a different clinic, because they realized, oh, we can't give you an appointment at this clinic because they only do up to 10 weeks and you're way farther along than that, so we're gonna send you to this other clinic 3 hours down the highway. So my husband took the day off work, no warning, just took it off, and the two of us drove 3 hours just to get to this place. And once we were there, we felt rather obligated to stay. And the only way that they were going to do anything for us was if I left my husband in the lobby and smiled while I did it. Don't forget the smiling part. Don't ever forget the smiling part. You will find yourself, if you're in that 5-week crunch period, or, sometimes less than 5 weeks. Most parents don't find out as early as we did. But if you're in that crunch time, you really don't have enough time to be getting picky. You find yourself in vulnerable kinds of compromising situations, putting up with shit you wouldn't normally put up with. No way in hell. Fuck this. I'm not going to deal with these crazy people. Let's just turn around and drive 3 hours back home. But, you got to make it happen. You got to make it happen, because the bad death is coming, and you have to make sure that you don't end up with the bad death. And you are urgent, and you are driven, and you don't have time to feel emotion. And then when it was all over, and I finally had some time to sit down and to realize that, yes, my son was dead. And I can cry about it now, because I don't have anyone left in this body to worry about except for me. And then I started bleeding. A lot. And on the bright side, I survived, and I was so exhilarated at the fact that my kids weren't going to lose their mom and my husband wasn't going to lose his wife, that, I was reasonably happy for at least a couple days, I think. At least one day. I was exhausted, and I was, somewhat exsanguinated, but I was okay. It's amazing how much a blood transfusion will perk you up. And of course, after that, the depression set in, and then I had to wade my way out of that. But after it was over, the perspective shift that I felt was amazing, because there was no longer any kind of urgency, and I was able to actually process my emotions. I was actually able to feel things. I was actually able to grieve. I was able to exist as a human being. Before that, it was like, put the kids in front of the TV and make phone call after phone call and make it work. Just make it work. Don't stop. Don't think. Don't weigh this situation too heavily. Just make it work. And find the good death, whatever that might be. And of course, after the little bleed out incident, I wrote up again on it was on Reddit, and I was like, hey, all you people who told me that I was being selfish and that my concerns were frivolous, not the term they used, but definitely the idea. I nearly bled to death, and I still feel horrified, not because of the situation in which I found myself when I was bleeding to death, but because of the situation in which I could have found myself bleeding to death. I don't think the people at that clinic would have taken good care of me. I don't think they I don't think they would have, you know. Everything that I saw at that clinic, with the way that clinic was run, with the way the nurses at that clinic treated me, everything I saw with the way they treated my husband, every single, red flag, every single warning light, every little sign indicated that that was not a good place for me. And then when I bled as much as I did and as quickly as I did, you know, I lost 3 pints in maybe about 20 minutes before they stopped the bleeding. Would they have been able to get me to a hospital in 20 minutes? Like, I had a very skillful team of doctors and nurses working on me to keep me from bleeding to death. And they were throwing everything they had at me. They pumped so many drugs into me. I had an IV in each arm. They were putting things in places that, they were doing everything they could to me. I think they gave me some shots in my leg. They were really throwing everything but the kitchen sink at me. In fact, I think they did throw the kitchen sink at me along with everything else. And they kept me alive. And the nightmares that I had weren't necessarily about being in that hospital, because everybody in that hospital was fucking fantastic. The nightmares were about that Planned Parenthood. Not Planned Parenthood as a whole. I know everybody thinks Planned Parenthood is so flippin' awesome. That clinic in particular was a nightmare. And so when I told people about it, they told me I was a liar. And so I started talking to pro-lifers, because I was done talking to the pro-choice crowd. And I was surprised, because when I talked to pro-life people, at first they were very suspicious of me, and I explained the situation, and once I explained, this is what happened, this is how we made the decision we did, most of them pretty much looked at it and said, okay, I get it, that makes sense. There are some people I know who don't really like my solution to the situation that I was in. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there, and I see posts by people out there all the time, this woman found out that her baby had a terminal diagnosis, and she kept it, and the baby ended up being perfectly fine, and it's like, do you have any idea how remarkably rare that is? I knew something was wrong with the pregnancy from the first couple weeks. And this is another thing people don't understand. I don't mean I didn't like the baby. I don't mean, something was wrong with the pregnancy, so I wanted to get rid of it. I mean, something felt not right. And it doesn't mean that I loved the baby any less. I loved the baby. But something kept on feeling not right about that pregnancy. And people would be talking with me about the pregnancy, and I always had this kind of doubtful, I guess things are going well. I guess things are okay. Baby has a heartbeat, so things must be fine. I feel okay. I'm not sick, so everything's probably okay. And then we got the first test back, the screening, that said that it was a 70% chance that it was fatal, and it was like, yeah, I knew it. I knew something was wrong. I wished that we were that lucky 30% couple that, didn't have a fatal diagnosis. I wished for it a lot. I remember I got some electronic dice, and I rolled them again and again and again just to see what 30% actually feels like. And at the same time, I wasn't surprised when we found out that we weren't that lucky 30%. And when people tell me that maybe the doctors were wrong and I just didn't realize it, and maybe if I just had like a little more faith or something in God, if you just held out a little longer, then you might have given birth to that miracle baby, except it wasn't a miracle baby, and I could feel it. I could feel it. How do you explain that to people? I can tell if I'm carrying a boy or a girl. I can feel it. I knew that was a boy. That's the reason we got the screening in the first place. I was certain it was a boy. I could feel it. And I kept saying, I can feel it. It's a boy. I want to get that screening. I want to start looking for baby names because I know it's a boy. I can tell. My husband was always just kind of joking with me. It's like, oh, you don't know that. You could be wrong. I could be wrong. I haven't been wrong yet, but I could be wrong. How do you explain that to people? That you know that your baby's going to die? How do you explain it to people that all you want for that baby is a peaceful, gentle, kind death somewhere safe? You know, that's the kind of way you want to die, isn't it? In your sleep, somewhere safe and warm and comfortable, surrounded by, people who love you. Seemed like a good way to go out to me. And it's quick. I made sure. I looked it up. I did my research, Quick and painless. And peaceful. As much as I could make it be. As much as I had the power to make it be. I honestly, I can keep saying it again and again, but I can't begin to express to you that sense of urgency. And when I say you don't know what it's like if you've never been there, you don't have any time left when you find out that your baby is terminally ill. And there are a lot of people who will sit down with you in a lot of situations and tell you, okay, calm down, let's talk about this. You have options. We just didn't really get to be that lucky. Like, we knew what we wanted because we talked about it beforehand, and we talked about it when we got the diagnosis, and we both knew that we wanted exactly the same thing, and so we both pursued that goal. But achieving that goal, it was scary, and it was difficult, and it was very uncertain. And because it was uncertain, we felt incredibly urgent and incredibly rushed. And it's not like we didn't care about the baby. Like, I think people look at that and say, oh, you were trying so hard to get an abortion, you just didn't care about the baby. And the thing is, we got the abortion because we cared about the baby. We got the abortion because that was the best thing that we could think of to give to him. And it was certainly the best thing that I could think of, that I could conceptualize to give to him. And so I had to get it for him. And that was all I thought about. All I cared about was him. What do I do for him? How do I do it for him? How do I make this work for him? What's a good place to die? What's a nice, safe place to die? Hell, I was in the hospital looking around and I think I even told my husband, yeah, this is a good place to die. And I meant it. I nearly died there. I was pretty okay with it. It was not a bad place to die. It's almost like, that animal part of you that, how animals, like I had a cat once, she was pregnant and she started making a little nest for herself. Like she found a quiet little corner and she made her little nest for herself, and that's where she wanted to have her kittens. And so eventually we set her up in the bathroom closet because it was a very small closet. And we made it sure it was nice and soft and dark and enclosed, and she could go in there, and we put some food and some water out for her, and that's where she had her kittens. And I swear that there is some part of humans that does that too. Like, okay, I need to have my baby in a safe place. Like, I remember there was a gal, she and I were in CNA training together, and she was very, very pregnant. She and her boyfriend were there together. And I remember we were inside the hospital for something, and she looked out the window and she saw a helicopter taking out from the landing pad on top of the hospital. And the reason we did that was, it was a very rural area, but that hospital was the biggest hospital in that region. And so, we were always, shipping patients to that hospital from all these little tiny, even smaller rural towns. And so I remember her looking out there, and I remember the way her eyes just sparkled when she looked at that helicopter, and she said, I hope I get to have my baby here. And I didn't understand it. Like, I kind of understood it. I understood what she was saying in the sense that she lived in a very rural, remote town, and it wasn't necessarily a good place to have a kid. Like, hospital wise, technology wise, if you want your kid to, if something goes wrong, you want to be in the hospital we were in instead of the hospital she probably would have been in her hometown. But I mean, I was so used to it being such a small, remote town. It was kind of like, okay, I get it when I think about it, but I also don't get it. Because I'd gone to that hospital before. It wasn't that good of a place. But I still remember that look, that look that I think a lot of mothers have. Like, I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, my first baby, and I went in and I looked around the delivery room and I started crying, and I was like, yeah, this is a great place to be born. This is a good place. You do that when your baby's dying too, apparently. At least I did. Is this a good place to die? Nope. Okay, we're moving on. We're going somewhere else. This isn't a good place. Planned Parenthood wasn't a good place to die. It wasn't. And I felt it with every bone in my body. And I'm sure that if they had been really, really sweet and really, really friendly and really, really compassionate, and if they'd greeted me and been kind to me, I would have felt differently. But as it was, it really didn't feel like a good place to die. And when I got to the hospital, yeah, that felt like a good place to die. And my husband and I both looked at it and talked about it, and it was like, we've worked really hard to get to this place. We trusted the doctor. We talked with the doctor for a considerable period of time. We talked with her together because we were both welcome to talk to the doctor who was performing the procedure. It was like, yeah, this is okay. This is a good place for him to die. This is okay. I can't begin to put it all into words. But I do have a very fun and entertaining list of all the interesting comments I've gotten over the last year. Not necessarily the interesting ones. I've gotten a lot of interesting comments from people who were very open-minded. They had lots of ideas, and they were talking about, life, death, abortion. I've had a lot of interesting comments like that. I'm talking about the interesting comments like, every once in a while, and it's not happened very often, but every once in a while I'll run into a pro-lifer who, doesn't really care what I have to say. They just look at the word abortion and they think you're a horrible person. And so I got a bunch of the juiciest ones of those, and a bunch of the juicy ones from back when I was talking to pro-choice people about my near abortion at Planned Parenthood. And I figured I'd share those with you to kind of, I don't know, brighten your day. But also to let you guys know that no matter what side of the argument you're on, some people are just assholes. And there are no good guys in this. Like, if you think you're one of the good guys, you're probably not paying close enough attention. Well, that pretty much guarantees that I'm never going to shut up. So thanks for that. Have a good night, everybody.